Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 150. I'm actually really excited for this next run of podcast. We're going to actually have a collection of guests from different sports. I'm a big believer in learning from other disciplines as we attack our baseball training and programming. So I think it's really important to look to folks from a whole different, kind of world and see what the commonalities of success are across industries. So today's guest is a guy I've really respected for a long time, who's had a lot of success, not just in his core competency, which is football, but also in MMA, with some baseball players, NHL players, Olympic swimmers, you name it. He's super talented and a really bright guy, and I think it'll show in this interview. So enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. One scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multimineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, Cressey. Today's guest has served as head strength and conditioning coach for the Denver Broncos for the past 5 seasons. He's also the co-founder of Landow Performance, a training facility in Centennial, Colorado that has helped to develop thousands of athletes, including Olympians and professional athletes associated with the NFL, NHL, MLB, UFC, and WNBA. A certified strength and conditioning coach and muscle activation technique certified specialist, he has lectured extensively both nationally and internationally, consulted across multiple college and professional sports, and authored 2 books. He also developed the ACL prevention program and the ACL return to sport protocols for the Steadman Hawkins Clinic in Denver, Colorado. He serves on the board of directors for the exercise science program at Metro State University, as well as the board for the master's program at Setanta College in Ireland. He graduated from the University of Northern Colorado, where he received a degree in kinesiology with an emphasis in exercise science. Please welcome to the show, Loren Landow. Loren, it has been way too long. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm excited for this.
Eric, I appreciate the opportunity, man. And anytime I get a chance to talk to you, I'm all ears.
Nice. Well, you're actually the first in a run. So we've gotten really baseball focused with this podcast, which was the original intent. But I'm like a huge believer in looking outside of our own industry, seeing what people are doing in every other sport. So I talk to golf folks, football folks, basketball, hockey, you name it. So we're kind of starting this little run of talking to folks from other sports who really have great perspective, and you check a lot of boxes. You obviously have a more recent history and being really locked in football, but I know you've done stuff in MMA. You worked with baseball guys. So I'm curious, like big picture, what are the lessons that you think baseball players can borrow from just about any discipline, but particularly the football world nowadays?
When I look at the football world, nowadays and the development of training and really the gaps I see within football, I would guess that it's probably pretty similar to baseball, where there's a major gap in general development,
Mhm.
general whether it's general physical preparations or general coordination patterns. Everybody's so specifically driven that I've got to believe that's kind of the gamut and what we're facing as an industry as a whole. Our people are really moving away from the general physical preparation, and they're just diving into things that everything that smells, looks, and tastes like the sport. And so that's one thing I see in our sport. I don't see many athletes these days either that have a good, strong, healthy training age.
Mhm.
Everybody's kind of shotgun approach. I'm going to go train with Eric in Florida, and then I'm going to go to this guy over here, and then I'm going to go to this guy over here, and there's nobody who's quarterbacking the whole
Mhm.
thing. So you're seeing I think that goes back to some of the general physical preparation, but you're getting all these mixed qualities at the different times and sometimes in the wrong time of preparation.
I love that commentary because I've had conversations with actually pitching coaches nowadays where a buddy of mine who's previously with Kennesaw State, he's now with the Guardians. He said, I feel like I'm more of a manager of pitchers than I am a pitching coach. It's so much more about like how do I allocate the stress throughout the year? And we sit down all the time with high school kids, and it's just like, hey, let's talk about what the yearly calendar should be so that you can actually have a plan and stick to it. Is the football world the same thing? Like, our guys just running off to combines here and there, and getting pulled in a lot of different directions from like an overall like just training adherence standpoint.
They do. I'd say it is a flavor of the week or month as far as a lot of training in the off seasons.
Mhm.
But like, look at the rookie classes that tend to come into the NFL. A lot of times by the time we get them in May, they've just gotten done with their combine prep that started in January and may have gone all the way through March. Well, they've done something that was very specific for this test, for this evaluation. And when they come into us, it's like their capacities, again, going back to that, there's going to be a consistent theme here, but their capacities are way down because
Mhm.
everything that they put their work in for was this one time power, this
Mhm.
one time speed. And to me, I've become the believer, like, we can chase, miles per hour on the pitch. We can chase how fast we run a 40. But really, what I'm concerned with is how many times can you repeat at a certain velocity? That's what I
Mhm.
care about.
I love that, like the idea of capacity. And I think back, I remember distinctly, it was at a conference up in Syracuse, I want to say. I ran into Buddy Morris probably like 2004, 2005. Like, I was like just finishing up grad school, and he had been in the NFL, gone to the college ranks, gone back to the NFL. And he just said to me, he's like, Eric, people don't even get it. It's like
Mm.
it's totally different now. Like, if you're on the sidelines, it's like watching a car accident on every
Oh,
single play. The speed had changed so much, and I didn't grasp it. At the time, I was really rooted in like college basketball and soccer and doing some stuff in in the kind of the, I guess, into the baseball realm initially. But you know, as I think back on it now, I'm reflecting on like how much baseball has changed over the past 15 to 20 years. Like, how the average player is like 12% heavier than he was 20, 25 years ago. Players are evaluated differently with very, very, heavy analytical metrics. The game is more specialized, right? You see guys throwing 98 mile an hour cutters, and starters not seeing third nine time through the order. And so obviously we've seen like a heavy, kind of change in the injury trends, where now we have new injuries that sports medicine can't even keep up with. I'm
mhm.
curious, how has football changed over the course of your career? Are you guys seeing like similar trends in that regard, where you talked about that narrow base at the young ages, but then these guys at the other end of the spectrum, like, they're playing the game at faster speeds than ever before. Like, can you guys even keep up with it?
Yeah, it's crazy because, I think if you look at all the analytics and all the metrics, I think they've said in the last 2 years, injuries on the rise in the NFL. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, how is that possible? We have better resources, we have better opportunities to help people. How can this be? And, we always say, well, guys are getting bigger, faster, stronger, and the collisions are bigger. Again, I do believe that goes back to the robustness. A lot of times when you look at the off-season training in our aspect, it's so narrow that we have such little time with them in the off-season that you can't really rebuild that firm foundation again. So as far as the injury trends, I would say, like, it's rampant, right? It is, but Buddy's right. It's a car accident. When I'm on the sideline, I'm sitting there going, one, how did that guy get up from that? But when you see the carnage in the line play, you're sitting there saying, how are there just not more injuries? Like it's truly, you've got to get very lucky at the same time.
Yeah, and then, it's kind of created this entire industry of recovery, right? Like
Yeah.
this wasn't a thing. Like people didn't even talk about sleep quality, nutrition, hydration 15,
Yeah.
20 years ago. And now it's pretty dramatic. Like are there things in that realm that have, appealed to you more? Everything from, obviously there's like more systemic things like, intrinsic factors, sleep, nutrition, hydration. And then there's also extrinsic. There's lots of, stuff out there. Like we love Mark Pro, we love BFR. There's a lot of different things that we can integrate. What have you seen the most success with in your group?
That's a good one because I think there's a lot of really good modalities that people are using.
Mhm.
And I think, if you go back to the big rocks, if you sit there and say, what are athletes not getting? I don't think they're really getting that great of sleep hygiene. I
Mhm.
don't think they're really getting that good undulation of periodization modeling throughout a season. At the big rocks, that's the things I think they're missing. And then on the small rocks, I think there's really a lot of good things that people are using modality wise, right? Whether it's the different physical therapy tools, whether it's cupping, needling, cryotherapy, float tank, hot cold contrast. But I think the biggest issues that I tend to see, Eric, is where does it fit?
Yeah.
And I think it's just like anything, like you can throw it all up against the wall and think, oh, I'm recovered, but was it the right modality and the right
Mhm.
intervention at the right time? And so I think that's one thing that we've run into in our field that's kind of problematic is we've all sat there and said, well, as long as they're doing modalities, they're going to recover.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. I mean, you might be doing something that's suppressing the nervous system, something that's stimulating the nervous system. And if you're doing them at the wrong
Yeah.
times, I think it can be problematic to
Yeah.
performance and healing.
You're playing for the tie. And
Y-
I've even always like just
mm,
thrown out the term like the best recovery solution is to never develop a work capacity problem in the first place. And
yeah.
I think you hinted at that earlier is guys just aren't building a broad enough base and they're stuck in specificities for so long that they aren't prepared for when it comes time to actually bounce back from these like really rigorous exposures.
Yeah, I think going back to like what are some of the best things. I think just good hands-on therapy.
Yeah.
Finding good therapists that can really feel tissue and understand tissue quality.
Mhm.
I think that's huge. I think being able to get players on a table and just feel like open chain,
Mhm.
ranges of motion, and just feel how they're moving in their joints in a more passive range, and then taking them off the table and seeing them in an active range and saying, is that similar to what I'm seeing in
Yeah.
the open chain?
I love that. It's a personal bias of mine, and it's probably unfair because I know you're prepared in a wide variety of realms. But I feel like almost every time I've seen you present, and this is in different places, like it always like recurs to me that you just nail acceleration. Like you
Mm,
speak on it, you understand it really really well. I always remember you dropping we're trading inches for angles. Like that was one that stuck out in my mind. I want to say it was like a NSCA conference in Las Vegas or something like that years ago. But whenever I hear your name, I instantly think acceleration, and it's obviously a key component of speed development. Something well from not just preparing NFL guys, but also effectively teaching guys to cheat the combine test, all that stuff.
yeah.
So let's talk about some key competencies relating to acceleration, and maybe we touch technical, slash coaching, but then also the principles of like, how do we actually train it at a high level?
Absolutely. So, if I'm looking at acceleration, I sit there and say, what are the trainable qualities that we can influence acceleration? If we look at, all of our trainable qualities, we can talk about, mobility, stability, and when we talk about that, we can talk about all the joints from the ground up. We talk about how the foot moves, how the big toe moves, how the ankle, the talocrural joint moves. How well does the shin move over the midfoot with the talocrural range of motion? What is the ability to flex the knee and be able to get bend? How can you load the hip? And you just kind of look all the way up the chain. So, from a mechanical standpoint, I'd say your flexibility, mobility strategies are absolutely critical. I think, again, looking at trainable qualities, we look at coordination. The
Mhm.
better coordination I have, the better I'm going to be able to express a storage of elastic energy. So, having athletes understand the ability to be able to elastically switch from flexion and extension, through that pelvic complex. And then I think, looking at, let's look at our strength qualities, right? We've got to have great, endurance capabilities. We've got to have great strength foundation. The better our strength, the better our power output. The better our power output, the better the ability to express force and the better ability to show speed and velocity. So when I look at all all those different things. Like we can sit there and say, if I had a continuum up of all these qualities that we can train, I'd say which one of these are going to get us faster, and you should
Yeah.
look at them all and say yes.
Mhm.
It's not one, it's
Yeah.
all.
I think
So go
that's
ahead.
not to cut you off. I'm and I know you got a million things that you can go in different directions, including like the actual like overall programming principles. Do you think we bias too much towards just pure strength work with our athletes? I'm curious because it's a trend I see in baseball, right? You see guys that get better for their first 2 years of college, and then they level off, they get hurt, they get more banged up. It's because it's like, hey, what took you to a 450 back squat? Like going to a 500 back squat, the injury risk goes higher, and you're not
Yeah.
getting much better. Training rate of force development, even velocity based training, stuff like that can make a big difference. Do you see that as much in the football side of things, or is it just so brute strength that you kind of have to keep selling out for it?
No, it's funny because I'd say in the interior play, right, you do sell out for that brute
Yeah,
strength. The players want to feel that weight on the bar.
yeah,
Whether it's a back squat, front squat, trap bar. They
mm,
want to feel that load. But I do think that a lot of the players are so biased onto
yeah,
that if I sit there, because I see it in my room, hey, we're going to go at 60% today, and we're going to take the weight way back, and I need you to move this thing as fast as you can. It's very hard for them to equate that
yeah,
has a similar or better
yeah,
outcome than what they've always done. So I agree that is that is definitely something that I think people have always gone to that. Well, this is how I've always done it, and this is how
yeah,
I feel good, or I feel it's my Superman cape leading into Sunday.
mhm,
And I always tell them, I said, if you pull off this week at 60%, when we go back up, watch how easy it's going to feel. Watch how better it's going to feel.
mhm,
So I do think that is a problem. Now, I'll contradict myself where I do think some of these athletes don't. In looking at acceleration specifically, I
mhm,
don't think some of these athletes do express enough time into pure strength
yeah,
to have that good first, second, third step expression
mhm.
of force. I've kind of always used I
That's a
think it
good
was
point.
the model of my first 2 to 3 steps is going to be really my overcoming strength, when I'm looking at my squat, my deadlift,
Mhm,
and then my kind of power cleans and my plyometrics kind of are my steps 3 and so on. And so for me it becomes much more elastic as they go further, it feels like. So I do think there's a bias of some
mhm,
strength patterns, but then I do believe in some athletes they don't saturate enough into pure strength to
yeah.
be able to express how much force they can give in those first couple steps.
Yeah, and even the commentary on the elastic qualities, I think it's so overlooked. We see a lot in the baseball world is right. Kids specialize in baseball, and you're never going to get the elasticity you get from playing soccer or basketball.
Mhm.
Like just the pure like ground contacts, the numbers are astronomical. It's like 2,200 changes of direction in a soccer game for like an average midfielder. Like you go and you just like play pick up hoops with your buddy once a week,
Oh,
or just do a strength addition program. It's just not enough. Are you seeing that in football as well? Like where guys aren't playing those other sports and they're actually being robbed of some of the elasticity, or is it just that the level that you're at, you're getting a lot of guys who are it's a little bit of a natural selection at work too, right?
yeah, I agree. There's a great natural selection, and the guys are great at what they
Mm,
do, and they picked the right parents.
mm,
And it's funny. I would say the further on they've gotten their career, it's really been taboo to go do those things.
yeah,
Right? Hey, don't go play basketball in the off season
yeah,
because if you get hurt, or don't go do this. And so, in a lot of ways, the scope of what their exposure to has kind of been narrowed down.
yeah,
And so I think it's a catch 22 for sure. But
mhm,
I had this conversation with somebody the other day. We were talking about the differences, and I worked with a decent amount of hockey, and I'm sure you
yeah,
have too back
yeah,
back in your day. But you could always tell the difference between a North American hockey player versus a European hockey player. Those guys would come in and their footwork skills, and if you put a soccer ball on,
yeah,
to their feet, they could juggle, they can move the ball with great dexterity and great control. And the North American guys are like, it's bouncing off their foot. So I think there's a lot to be said with that when we look at just
yeah,
the development of athletic capability. It goes, we could talk about it about long-term athletic development.
yeah.
And I think as these athletes get further in their career, as they should get more narrowed. But I think sometimes they narrow so much that it does hurt some of their development.
That's huge, and something we hammer home heavily on this podcast, just because baseball's probably the sport out there that's most heavily impacted because of the relationship between specialization and injury seems to be higher. Like
Hmm.
kids specialize in soccer. Not everybody blows out their ACL. You know, the majority of players have arm issues each season in some capacity, so it snowballs faster. Jumping back on the acceleration kind of conversation, let's talk like big picture programming principles. Like, what do you like? How often do you train it? Do you microdose it throughout the week? Do you like more intensive sessions less frequently? What's your kind of overall approach throughout the year for it?
If I look at just like we'll look at like off season and blending
Mhm.
into what is our off season program. Like I think that it's something that you have to touch on pretty frequently. I do believe that all of it is a skill, and I think it's also a robustness of the tissue as well. And so to be the ability to express those forces, I think gives those tissues the capacity or the capability to handle big force. And when it comes into change of direction later, if I've been working on great acceleration, I've got good strong tension in the Achilles. I've got to believe as I'm working into my change of direction, I'm bursting out into acceleration, that I've got a stiffer ankle complex and my Achilles is more robust to be able to handle that. So I look at those kind of needs in the off
Mhm.
season. But one thing I do believe in is I build out my models short to long.
Mhm.
And so if I look at acceleration, it's short to long, and then if I look at my capacities or my max V, it's long to short, and then they
Mhm.
kind of converge and blend. So I would say they get pure acceleration 1 day a week, but they get a hybrid of acceleration with all their change of
Yeah.
direction work. Because I try to show the athletes how your acceleration isn't just for this cool ability to go straight ahead.
Yeah.
Like once I drop the hips and I flip my hips, like boom, now it's right back
Yeah.
to my acceleration qualities. I teach something with our defensive players, and it's called break gas. And it's ultimately teaching them as I'm going backwards and I have to plant and react. I break one leg, and as I'm breaking on one leg, my other leg is going right into acceleration principles. And so I'm
Mhm.
hitting those acceleration mechanics. So they see those types of drills
Mhm.
probably 2 to 3 times a week in
Yeah.
the off season. Now, as we get it, closer into mini camps and everything like that, football is a priority. And so I don't get a lot of exposure on the movement side, but I'm always rehearsing those acceleration qualities or those mechanics within their warm up as they're leading into their practices. So much so that uh, uh, 2 years ago, we had a special teams coach that he would teach the Lando lean, he called it.
Mhm.
And it was a specific acceleration setup that we would get into. And I would teach the first few steps of acceleration on
Mhm.
kickoff coverage. So, they were getting expressed into more specific aspects in training camp, in mini camps. And then as the season went, the coach would always reiterate Lando lean, whatever. And we'd look at the angles and the positions and, so there was a way that they were getting the reinforcement of those qualities in season,
Mhm.
and yeah, that's really about the bulk of time I give with the guys to be able to express movement in season. It's really challenging.
With we know that as the distance of a run increases, the injury risk goes higher.
Hmm.
Particularly when we're talking about early in a training program, like guys get a little bit of a breather at the end of the season, and you want to start reintegrating stuff. Like we've had a lot of success with like some like Derek Hanson's like 10 by 10 stuff with
Hmm.
just like building some early capacity with athletes where the total volume is really low, but there's a lot of repeated bouts. Where do you get nervous, right? Like when you have a guy that's going like, is it 15? Is it 20? What's the distance where you're starting to see guys get more upright and it's like, hey, maybe
Yeah.
we're moving a little too fast with this.
Yeah, I would say the wheels don't tend to fall off from what I see until about 40 to 50 yards.
Yeah.
The only time I really get nervous is when sometimes you watch kickoff coverage.
Yeah.
If I'm watching acceleration, I'm rarely concerned in acceleration. The
Mhm.
biggest time I'll get
Yeah.
it concerned is when I'm watching baseball players because
Yeah.
when they're trying to I worked with a couple baseball players about 6, 7 years ago who were having reoccurring groin and hip flexor issues. And one thing I was finding is they were really trying hard to dig and drive out an acceleration,
Yeah.
but you're dealing with a surface that gives. If
Mhm.
you're running the base paths and that dirt gives, like you're trying to push and that hip is still going back into that negative
Yeah.
acceleration back. And so what happens, you get this excessive eccentric loading onto the hip flexors and then obviously into the adductors that support hip flexion in your adductor brevis, your pectineus, and your adductor longus. They support hip flexion. So those guys are getting taken for a ride. Every time you try to push into the dirt and the dirt gives, it's
Mhm.
like a little bit of slack in the line. So that's the only time I would ever get nervous, honestly, in acceleration was watching baseball players, digging out that run to first, or even trying to extend from first to second. When you just see
Yeah.
them push really hard, they've got to get back through. And
Yeah.
but in our sport, I'd say, the number one predictor for soft tissue injury is high speed yards.
Mhm.
And so, look at watching special teams play, watching, gunners go down on the field and they're sprinting full speed. And at the same time, oh, by the way, somebody's grabbing and yanking
Yeah.
and pulling on me as I'm trying to hit my mechanics. And so those are the things that always kind of you're like, oh boy,
Yeah.
you're crossing your fingers.
It's like a give and take. In football, you get top speed more often. Obviously, kickoff coverage, like you talked about, or just like a receiver running a deep route. Baseball, you never get it. It's
Yeah.
impossible. You run fast and you turn left. And I think that or
It's like
the distance.
NASCAR.
Yeah, it's that's the challenge. The difference though is that baseball, it's like if you have a little blip, you're in a lot of trouble because it's 162 games. You maybe 2 days off a month. You can't possibly play catch up at that highest level when there's something going on. And football, it's bad every Sunday, but at least you got 6 days before you got to do it again. So it's a trade off for sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
We interrupt this episode with a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an NSF certified all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients designed to support your body's nutritional needs. I use this product daily and a ton of our athletes do as well. Head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and claim my special offer today for 10 free travel packs with your first purchase. I'd encourage you to give it a shot too, especially because of this great offer and because it gives you peace of mind knowing that you're covering all your nutritional bases. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, to get that special offer. I was gonna say, we're talking about like key considerations across all sports, and don't think you have to necessarily be like pigeonholed into football, but are there things in your assessment process in particular that you're looking at, whether it's movement competencies or speed qualities, whatever it may be, that you're worried about for your MMA guys, your baseball, your hockey, your football guys, all like.
Yeah, I love watching, as the years gone on, I sit back and say, what really is going to tick the biggest box, or what's the most, juice for the squeeze. And, I'll watch, I like just coming to my facility the last couple of days. Like, I just like to watch athletes move and see how do they express force? Do they express it efficiently, inefficiently? And so I'm always looking like bend patterns, like how well do they bend? How well do they fold? How well can they go into those positions of squat and lunge and lateral lunge? And those are some key indicators for me of like what the capabilities are of joint in multi limb function or multi joint function. And so once I start evaluating somebody and seeing how they move in space in those kind of static based exercises, I call them static because they're not locomotion per se.
Yeah.
And then saying, okay, this person actually has pretty good bend quality. Let's see what they do when they start to move. And see, can they figure it out on their own? And are they relaxed? Can they be coordinative? Can they be smooth? Can they be elastic? And those are the things that really jump out at me, and just like an eyeball evaluation. How well do they connect the dots of efficiency, or how inefficient are they? And so that's when I start kind of mapping out like where I think I need to spend my time. Hey, this athlete, they've got great power qualities in the weight room. We've seen it, but they don't know how to load and they don't know how to express that force in a good orchestrated manner. And so that's kind of how I'll use like the weight room. I'll use a little bit of the warm up and then make them, get them bouncy, get them elastic, and just see how efficient they start to move. Some athletes, it's crazy to me, is like they can bend well, they can squat well, they can lunge well, they can go through all the whole dynamic patterns extremely well, and you get them into locomotion and they get really rigid
Yeah.
and they rob what they have.
Yeah, it's the ability to relax that's so hard to like to teach. I mean,
Mhm.
it's some people just go into panic mode right away. With sorry, go ahead.
I
Didn't mean
was
to
going
cut
to
you off.
say, here's a perfect example with MMA fighters. You go to their sparring and you watch them hit the mitts and they're relaxed and they're fluid and they're elastic, and then all of a sudden we come in here and we go into conditioning and everything is
Yeah.
and they're robbing the elasticity by just trying harder. And it's
Mhm.
like, no, don't try as hard.
Yeah, a lot of the best arms on the planet, like, guys that hit 100 for the first time, it's like I just felt like my arm was just whipping through. I wasn't like muscling up and trying to throw harder. It's more about putting
Mhm.
yourself in positions to be successful and timing things up well. Do you guys do much in the realm of like force velocity profiling, whether it's force plates? And you guys have had some experience with Proteus as well. Like,
Yeah.
what gets you excited on that front nowadays?
It's funny,
Yeah,
the produce has been in my
yeah,
facility, so now I'm gonna
yeah,
start spending a lot more
yeah.
time with it. I'm excited to play around
Mm,
with it. But, we'll play around on I say, "Well, we'll play around on the force plates," but, I always think, like, you can see with an athlete if they're a short converter, quick converter, and are they elastic guy, are they a strength guy? And so for me, it's utilizing like the force plate data to
Mhm.
kind of hopefully kind of complement what I'm
Yeah,
already
verify
seeing.
it. Yeah,
Yeah, verify what I'm already seeing. And it goes back to the same thing I said earlier, like everybody needs all the training qualities,
yeah,
but who needs more of what?
yeah,
And so, utilizing those types of tests or those types of assessments to sit there and say, this guy is really elastic. He needs to be stronger. This guy needs to
mhm,
be strong, or this guy's strong. He needs to be more elastic, and utilizing the force plate data to help kind of run
yeah.
with that.
When you walk into your facility, right, you'll see MMA guys, you'll see baseball players, male and female athletes, you'll see obviously NFL guys. Like, what are the elements that for you are applicable across all sports? And then when I wrote this question, I had to like
Mhm.
stop and think about the
Mm.
things that were key for me about how I viewed movement. Is there stuff that you see pretty much everybody doing in your facility?
Yeah, I think like I think the understanding of a good acceleration habits are good, right? We talked about acceleration earlier, and almost every sport needs the ability to express that acceleration component. There might be changes of body posture. We have technical models that we kind of teach by, but then ultimately we have to have sport models that we adapt to. So there's bandwidths of what is necessary. I might need to hit these positions. So I think acceleration is a key thing. And if I'm you know what? There's one position I've been thinking about, and I've been watching quite a bit lately, Eric. And it's a simple squat pattern, and I'm noticing a commonality in the athletes who can lunge lateral really well can do a lot of good things. So,
Mhm,
sometimes we see certain things in certain exercises and we're like, wow, this really ticks a box. Here's another one. If I take somebody into an open chain evaluation, and
mhm,
if I take them into hip flexion, hip internal rotation,
mhm,
my best movers have the best availability of hip internal rotation and hip
mhm.
flexion. And so, as we're in this field longer, we start to see these things like they just keep showing up. They keep showing up. That is one. And then that
Yeah,
lunge lateral pattern is another one that keeps showing up for me.
yeah,
And I don't know why. I don't know if
mhm,
it means that they've got a greater ability to decelerate or change direction, or they just have these fluidity patterns. But those are a couple things that have been jumping out at me lately that kind of hold true with some great athleticism and health.
yeah.
Athleticism and health.
I think so. And hip IR just in general. I mean, obviously there's research that correlates it to, low back pain in golfers, and we can see it,
Mhm.
you lose it across that, that movement pattern, and you're gonna have issues in pretty much any rotational sport. And you can work around it. If you're a pitcher, you can be more externally rotated on your back leg on the mound. And there's always adjustments, but there's nothing better than actually preserving what God gave you. But
Mhm.
what's actually fascinating, I'll give you an anecdotal story. So I even did a podcast on it. My first orthopedic surgery ever was a meniscus repair. So I had a
Okay.
left meniscus repair in January of 2021. And so there's 2 weeks non-weight bearing and then 2 weeks partial weight bearing. So it was effectively 4 weeks on crutches, very sagittal plane driven. And then coming out of it, it was like, hey, let's not be stupid. Because of the nature of my repair, they actually had to do like basically gave me a grade 2 MCL sprain in order to get access to the meniscus. So I had quite a bit of medial trauma. So frontal plane was just kind of out for about 2 months. And I distinctly just remember coming out of it and like being like, wow, my groins are tight. Like I
Mhm.
didn't I took for granted how much just like being on the floor, demonstrating exercises, like doing like partner mirror side shuffle drills with other
Yeah.
athletes, all those different things. And it really has like, I mean, I'm 2 years later now as we record this. It had a marked like downfall to my movement quality. Like I've had to work very, very hard to get it back. There's to your point, like that lateral lunge, there's something about the frontal
Mhm.
plane where you can't lose it. And I'm sure there's a trickle down effect for a lot of older adults, who used to be athletes who, get more sedentary, and you got to move side to side. We got to
Yeah.
put it in our warm ups for people who aren't even athletes, and really expose them to it because it's so easy to lose that adductor length.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So I know you've mentored a lot of young coaches. That you've obviously had people that have come up underneath you, both as interns, as employees at your facility. And one of the things we both, it's so hard to teach someone how to write a comprehensive training
Mm.
program, right? People get really caught up with the flavor of the week they saw on Instagram, or they maybe haven't been exposed to enough philosophies, so they just kind of like regurgitate what they saw somewhere else. Like, what advice would you give to young coaches who want to learn how to write good programs?
Yeah. It's you've got it. Yeah. you've got to fail. You've
Yeah,
got to fail. You've
love
got to
that.
jump in, and you've got to start somewhere.
Mhm.
One thing I always tell, I never try to give too much away because I want to see what you come up with.
Yeah,
But the one thing I talk about is exercise sequence, or how do you sequence your training? Are you doing all your comprehensive lifting and then you're doing your running?
yeah,
How do you sequence it all, and what is
yeah,
priority? So I always say, we always say we build with the goal in mind. Well, what's your goal? Okay, build with that goal. Okay, where does the movement fall? What's the warm up look like, and how are you going to how are you going to synchronize your strength and your movement throughout the week, and how are you going to bring them down during the week, and when you can bring them back up? So I always talk to them about, like, what's your goal. Now build your sequence based on what you told me your goal was, because a lot of times
yeah,
I'll ask a coach what your goal is, and then I'll look at the program and go, this has nothing to do with the goal you told me.
yeah,
And so, because I think they get caught up in all the abilities of what I can put on paper, and I think as we get older as practitioners, I probably remove more that's on the paper than keep on. And so I think there's this need that I have to just saturate more and more work, instead of like the sequencing of it and how it's being done. So I always talk about, you've got to be right on with your sequencing. That's the number one thing. But I want them to trial by fire, and I want them
yeah,
to fail, and I want them to write a lot of programs, and I want to see your why. Like, you should
mhm,
be, we always say it, it's the cliche, it's the right answer to say in our field. You should be able to explain the why of everything you put on there.
yep,
And I believe that. You should have a good, solid justification for everything you have. And
mhm,
you might bring something to me going, you know what, I didn't think about that. That's
yeah,
great. I didn't think about that for this, and that makes total sense.
mhm,
So if you sit back and you build out your programming, by justifying your why you're doing it and what the
mhm,
goal is, I don't think you can go wrong early
yeah,
on. We're going to make mistakes.
yeah,
I think early on in my career, I don't know about yours, but man, I'd write a program, and maybe it was bad, maybe it was good, but an athlete would go have success, and I immediately thought I was amazing. Or quite opposite.
yeah,
You write a program and maybe it was really good, and the athlete didn't have success, and you thought, man, I suck. Well, I've learned that you can't just judge based off that one trial. Like,
mhm.
you've got to make your mistakes along the way, and
Gonna
you've
build a
got to.
sample size. That's
Yeah,
it. Mhm,
and can you sit there and say, like, from what we know today, scientifically based practice, does this make sense?
yeah,
Does this follow the principles that I believe in, and that we know about development, that we know about common injuries for this sport, and how we can hopefully back engineer and keep them more healthy? Like, does it answer those types of questions? So,
mhm.
you have to be able to go back in the checks and balance and say, does this follow a sequence? And am I living up to the goal that I said I put out?
It's so important to the failure aspect of that is so key. Actually, Eric Schoenberg's the physical therapist at our facility in Florida, and he's mentored a lot of students. I'll never forget. He had one student, and this is 10 years ago, and he asked him, they had a patient in front of him, patient finished session. He's like, what would you do? Or what did you think? And the guy was like, well, Bill Hartman would do this, and Charlie Weingroff would do this. It's like,
Yeah,
hey, well, what would you do? Like,
yeah,
those guys are both brilliant and super successful, but what would you do? Like,
yeah,
they're not here in the room with you. Like, you need to have a leg to stand on your own. And I think we have that way too often as people get really rigidly adherent to methods
yeah,
instead of recognizing that all these different disciplines can come together. And it's kind of like a unique
yeah.
casserole for every athlete or patient that's in front of them.
I think you bring up a really good point, because I think that we sit there and we argue, periodization models, and we argue all these different things, and at the end of the day, these were models.
Yeah.
These were models that put forth, and your circumstances are going to be different than my
Yeah.
circumstances, and what fits best? Is it block training? Is it weekly undulated? Is it daily undulated? Like, what works best? And ultimately, it's going to be, you know what works best for your scenario and the athlete that you're dealing with their training age and their injury history, and all those other qualifications that really allow you to further individualize. But I think we argue so much on semantics, or we argue on, well, this is what my guru says, or this is what this
Mhm.
guru says. No, what do you think? What do you know
Mhm.
to be true today to what you know? And
What
that's challenging.
I like leaning on conversations like this because you've done this for a long time. Like I'm 2 decades deep at this point. Like And it's fascinating. I'll hear people make these like really, really steadfast, like strong statements that like this is the way to do things. It's
Mhm,
like your facility's been open for 2 years. Like
mhm.
you don't know like how this is gonna play out. Like we have
Yeah,
actually 5 kids that were with us at age 14 that are now pitching in the big leagues. So
that's
like that's like
awesome.
it's like a cool
Yeah,
long-term development model where it's like,
yeah,
all right, this is a
yeah.
powerful thing, and we're learning, we're continuously adjusting and taking our licks where things don't go well. But I just think we have to be open minded. I just love the concept of like, be open to fail, but you also have to be willing to admit when you did fail. Like you have to be able to
Yeah.
identify it
Yeah.
and have some humility.
Yeah. And I think as a young coach, that's really hard to admit. I
Yeah.
think, as I've gotten older, I've sat there and been like, yep, I screwed that one up. But as a young coach, like I think your ego and your pride is in the way, and you don't want to say, I don't know better, or I don't want to reach out to somebody, or somebody does know better on this subject. And I think that's a real powerful thing when you sit there and say, you know what, let me call somebody. Let me
Yeah.
see who I can talk to on this.
And I'm kind of leading in my next question almost by accident, but you've worked with athletes all across the training lifespan. So we talked about different sports, but like you and I both know, you see 13, 14, 15-year-old kids that'll start up in your facility.
Mm,
And some of those guys are playing professional sports and getting scholarships to play Division I athletics, all that stuff. Are there key checkpoints for you, across this
mm,
developmental timeline in terms of like, I remember Mike Boyle being like, "Hey, my kids, it was 2 lifts a week from age 11 on. So certainly it was,
mm,
maybe one when they were 11, and it was four when they were 17, and that
mm.
helped them out. Obviously there's nutritional stuff. Like I know what we do with our, kind of 12 and 13-year-old kids, what we do with our 14, 15, and then our 17, 18. They're all very different. For you at Landau Performance, like, are there certain things that you think are like sequential development points for you in terms of how you look at long-term athletic development?
Yeah, that's actually really, when you were going back to the athletes who you had some 14-year-olds who are now in the big leagues. I came across some pictures the other day of, we had like, I can tell you right now, there were 4 kids in the picture. Actually, no, I take that back. There were 5 kids in this picture of 12 high school athletes, and 5 of them are playing in the NFL right
It's
now.
awesome.
One's playing in the Super Bowl on Sunday. One of
Mhm.
those kids was Christian McCaffrey. And
Mhm.
so like these kids are playing at a high level. And then I look further down, and there's a kid who's playing, AAA baseball for the Braves. There's a
Yeah.
kid who's, now fighting in Bellator for mixed martial arts. So again, you see the growth of these
Yeah.
athletes developing, and goes back to like it was general physical preparation.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying here's how to be a better this or a better that. Like let's maximize the human body. So I think going back to your original question, and Misty Franklin was another one. 11
Yeah.
years old, she started in our facility, and then I was able to watch her from 11 to go into the first Olympics at 17. And so what I noticed with those athletes and then her is when puberty hits and you just see these growth spurts, like, can you maintain the athleticism?
Yeah.
Can you maintain all those things that we spoke about earlier that were key into athletic development, the elasticity, the orchestration of sequential joint movements, and how you propel force and how you absorb force? Like, can you keep those qualities and those movement patterns influenced while they're going through these extreme changes in height and center of mass changes and that awkwardness? I always felt that if you kept your athletes kind of, it was like rebooting your computer if you could keep
Yep.
them on these movement qualities. And that's one thing. If the athletes kind of quit coming in at different times of development, you would see them regress big time until they
That's awesome.
shot back up. But if they stayed consistent into
Yeah.
movement, I called it movement hygiene,
Yeah.
things that we can do every day. If they were consistent on that, you never saw that drop off when they went through those growth spurts.
That's a
So
huge point. I love that because these kids will literally shoot up 6 inches in 6 months. It happens. And if that 6 months coincides when they decide to go in season and just can training, like they lost all of the competency stuff that they worked to build before that. It's
I
huge.
I remember parents coming to me saying, my son or my daughter, they've grown 5 inches in X amount of time, and just when they run now, it's gangly and their legs are swinging. I'm like, put yourself on stilts. They're 6 inches right now. Tell me how well you're going to move,
Yeah.
and your body has to readjust and recalibrate to that.
And what also people don't realize, and Greg Rose has talked about this a lot with respect to like kind of long-term development golfers, like those are actually critical windows to train power because what
Hmm.
happens, the bones stretch out fast, the muscles and tendons can't keep up. So you got a perfect kind of environment for elasticity. So you
Absolutely.
might as well take advantage of that growth spurt and actually use it to kind of catapult you, no pun intended, forward.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll shift up a little bit. I'm always curious about like what bright guys in the industry are excited about, what they're doing differently. Like for you, what's been your biggest growth area, in recent history? Like what have you changed in your programming that you've kind of learned from, in the past that maybe you could have done differently?
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked the question a lot, like what do I see now in the NFL versus how I was preparing guys for the NFL when I was outside?
Mhm.
And I would say when I was outside, I wasn't preparing. There's a common theme here. I wasn't preparing them with enough capacity of work.
Mhm.
Once you start seeing what these practices look like, my first year in, I was like, oh my god, these practices were a lot more volume than I had expected. And so I would say for me, the biggest thing that I've been working on for the last 5 years, Eric, was trying to solve this riddle of the NFL because the timelines are not ideal. The windows that you have to work with them are not ideal. And so I'm sitting there saying, time's our biggest adversary. How can I maximize the time that I have and best prepare these guys for something that's as violent as the game is? And so that's probably what I've been racking my brain on the most is how do you fit it all together from an assessment standpoint to a daily readiness to, what their catapult reports read out and how do you
Yeah.
blend it all together? And it's a challenging puzzle without a doubt. And so I think I've
Mhm.
tried to do my damnedest to deep dive and try to absorb and
Yeah.
understand as much as I can of it. And there's so many variables to it, but that's what consumes most my moments that I'm awake and even when I'm asleep.
I love it. Maybe building on that, like you're a progressive thinker. You're always thinking about ways you can get better. So obviously that's
Mhm.
been something you've attacked. What now is what's the weird stuff you think about at 3 a.m. as you stare off into blackness? Like what excites you now, whether it's in
Mm.
the research or in just going into the facility and experimenting with stuff now?
Well, I think the biggest thing is like how you communicate things and make them actionable.
Mhm.
You and I being in team sports, I think that's the challenging thing is we sit there and we say, here's some things that we're seeing that are trend wise, and here's the things that are kind of red flags to us. How can I best communicate that to a position coach or a coordinator to sit there and say, I really need you to listen to this information. And so I think it's really like the delivery of communication, honestly, more
Yeah,
than anything right now is how do I've
really
got
good.
this knowledge, I have this knowledge. Now, how can I have you understand how important it is to me and how do I make it important to you where it's actually actionable? And
Yeah.
that's not that easy.
Closing the gap on what you know and what you can
Mhm.
actually apply.
Mhm.
All right, I mean, we always do a lightning round on the tail end of any of these
Okay.
podcasts, and I know you're a voracious reader. So, what's one book that you think every young athlete should read?
You know what I love? Ah, man, I gave this to all my players a couple years ago on the Broncos, and it's Chop Wood, Carry Water.
Yeah,
I
common.
l-
We've heard that one before. That's a good recommendation.
love it. I love it, and I also love. Can I give one more answer?
Yeah, for sure.
Trevor Moawad's "It Takes What It
Yeah,
Takes."
great one
Hmm.
too. Previous the late Trevor Moawad, God rest
Hmm.
his soul, a
Hmm.
previous podcast guest, so it's a great listen. People should check
Oh,
out. Um,
absolutely.
what about a book that you think every coach should read?
Every coach. I really love the book David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay, yeah.
I think Gladwell has some good books to look
Mhm.
at scenarios and situations. I really really enjoyed that one. David and Goliath was a good one.
I like that. I read that a while ago. I gotta go back and
Hmm.
revisit that maybe with a different lens. I wasn't
Hmm.
coaching as much as I probably am now then, so it'd be a good check
Hmm.
out. If you could go back in time and give a younger Loren Landow some advice, say, I don't know, 25 years ago, what would it be?
Don't get high with the highs. Don't get low with the lows. One step in front of the other. Like just trying to. I'm a believer that one of my X factors is I'm very very consistent,
Mhm.
and I would tell that young guy, hey, hold true to the consistency of how you believe and how you work and what you do,
Mhm.
but don't get high with the highs. Don't get low with the lows, and just be that middle guy.
I like that. That's big for our athletes too. They got
Hmm.
so much negativity in their lives when you can just kind of be that neutral influence. To reference a Trevor
Hmm.
Moawad, kind of
Hmm.
concept. That's big, man. Hey, tell folks where they can find you. I know obviously you got the facility. You got a
Yep.
pretty active social media presence. Make sure you spread the word here.
Absolutely. So, gosh, Instagram, it's Loren Landow, and then I haven't been on Twitter in a while, but I'm probably going to get back on.
There you go. It's one rule of working in pro sports: don't check your
Oh, dude.
mentions, right?
Oh, dude. Oh, dude. Yeah, yeah. I got rid of Twitter a couple years ago.
Smart move. And then the facility, it's Landau Performance
Yeah, Lando Performance.
in Colorado.
Absolutely.
They do a great job. So definitely, if you guys are in that neck of the woods, check them out. Lauren, this was awesome, man. I selfishly, I always love having these conversations because I get to learn a lot. But I know our audience, players, parents, coaches, definitely picked up some great stuff as well. So really appreciate you taking the time, man.
Appreciate you, Eric. Thank you, and honor to be on here with you.